Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Well, hello, everyone, and good evening. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual faculty lecture series. My name is Vanessa Ayala, and I am the event coordinator here at UCSB's Office of Admissions. Before we get started on today's lecture, I'd like to get some housekeeping items situated. Please note that this is a webinar setting, therefore cameras and microphones will be inaccessible, meaning we will not be able to see or hear you. However, please feel free to utilize the chat feature should you have any questions. We will also have a brief Q&A session towards the end of the presentation for the professor to answer your lovely questions. Today, we are also fortunate to have our Executive Director of Admissions, Kuka Acosta, moderating the chat should you have any admissions related questions throughout the presentation. Lastly, this session, along with the rest of our faculty lecture series, will be recorded and shared on the admissions YouTube account, UCSB for me. So make sure to stay tuned on when those will be released. That being said, I'm very excited to introduce you to today's lecture faculty will be Professor Kim Garcia from the College of Creative Studies. I'm excited not only because I am a graduate of CCS, but I received support from Professor Garcia during the installation for my senior exhibition, which is one of the requirements for art majors at the College of Creative Studies. Kim Garcia is a sculpture and spatial studies professor within the college at UCSB and works in sculpture, drawing, and painting. They are also a working artist currently based in Los Angeles, California, and their practice centers on oral storytelling to explore the complexities of inheritance, post-colonial identity, and the lasting effects on history in the present. Kim comes from a background in creating collaborative community projects that often employ alternative spaces to explore studio art practices, site-specific collaboration, and museum and exhibition research. Today's lecture, we will focus on how the art process is informed by research. And so without further ado, I will hand you over to Professor Garcia.
Hi, thank you, Vanessa, for inviting me to speak and share about my work and then also what I'm doing in the College of Creative Studies. So it seems like you guys are all interested in applying for UCSB. One of the most exciting things of being in a UC is that you have an opportunity to work with faculty who are researchers and practitioners in the field of your major. So we're all active artists that work myself in Los Angeles and in Santa Barbara. So I'm going to begin the talk to speak a little bit about my practice as an artist and then talk how that informs the way that I teach the classes here at UCSB. I teach both mostly in the College of Creative Studies, but I also teach in the Letters and Sciences in the art department there. So I'll even go over about the differences between those two ways to major in art. Okay. So I will start. So the lecture is called Art Searching Through Making. You'll get kind of an idea of what I mean by that as I go through the process. Okay. Every art series I make begins with a haunting. And haunting, I'm thinking of a historical past results in a trauma, a pain, or a wound. I can't say that in my work I have a clear visual apparition that follows my body as a second generation Filipino American or as a female artist, but it's more like I'm trying to give form to a pressure, a tension, a mistranslation, and a longing. This work is called Ancestors, and it was one of my first investigations of thinking about this mythical ancestor lineage. And I was thinking a lot about how masks, how they're flat and how they interface with the world, and also thinking about how two flat forms in sculpture can combine to create a whole. And I was thinking about that gesture as something similar to thinking about family units. In some ways, I find Christina Sharp's book in the gun Okay. All right, let me backtrack. Okay. Let me talk. I'll start with this slide. So when I'm making work, it's often being developed as a kind of choreography of sculptures where I attempt to notate where an archive of feelings might exist in my body, and how those personal and inherited feelings might contend with historical parallels. So in this work, Promise Prince, I'm utilizing this kind of tension through the rope that's really suspending the sculpture. And I know that most of you at one point in life can relate to this idea of being pulled in so many different directions that it almost feels like you're falling apart. And this is probably the best example of how I think of those feelings as a type of physical force that affects the body as this kind of record of that experience. I think a lot about anthropology in my work, specifically about how histories are recorded, subdued, and erased, how objects come into meaning through culture and community, and how they can take on different additional meanings through time. In a lot of my work, there is this material vocabulary that is built through each series, and they bleed into one another and change meanings. And I really lean on intuition as a tool, because I think that intuition, the way that we navigate life is based on our upbringing, our culture, and our decisions. Even if we might not know where they come from immediately, they carry histories that inform those decisions. My use of abstraction and whimsical forms are from this generative practice of fiction. There's this literary anthropologist named Wolfgang Iser, and he speaks about fiction as this transgressive act that pulls from the real and the imaginary. So it gives real determinacy to the imaginary while undermining the determinacy of the real. And for me, this directly correlates to how we deal with memories. The more you try to remember something, the further you get away from it. Details change, new things get emphasized that shift the whole story into another context, mixing whatever present state you're in with that past memory in order to create a new memory that is past and also present. So I found this infographic that can help illustrate what I'm thinking about in terms of my process. So I thought of fiction in relationship to the mold making process. I thought of it as a mold, as this indexical imprint of a real experience because it uses a real object, and that the mold is this absence of the object. So whatever material flows into the mold for me is this kind of fictionalizing act which reimagines and reprocesses the real experience into a fiction that fuses both the imaginary and the real together. So I feel like a fossil is a really great example of how I think about my work because just the process of the fossil, an organism dies, it's buried, and then over time it dissolves. And then it leaves this kind of empty space that's the imprint of that lived organism. And then over time, sediments and minerals fill up that empty space, and you get a cast. So fossils are, in essence, really just casts. So for me, I view that really through my work that it's something that's shaped through a past that is absent or invisible. So as an artist, I also work in video. The major that I teach is sculpture and spatial studies. So that means I work in a variety of material and medium. That just means I work through space and installation. So essentially, this is a video. It's typically looped. It's a 2-minute loop, which I'll play as I'm talking over it. And for me, this piece was about thinking about the action of fiction, the importance of the object, its physical index on the sand, and also the idea of burying something important to save, to mourn, and also to remember. So I'll just play it a little bit. Oh, yes. Also, feel free to ask any questions. I'm like looking at the chat just in case. So this work was in conversation with another sculpture, and so this was a smaller video projection, and I used the color red to link the two sculptures together. So this is a larger sculpture. I was thinking about it as adding another layer of meaning to the work, thinking that, the hands were what made this larger red knot adjacent to it, or perhaps the red hands were the hands of this knot. So I liked thinking about how these multiple narratives can continue to inform one another. So I'm going to just talk about two series of works just to be mindful of time. I am talking about a series called Is Love a Tender Thing? The aim of the series was that I really wanted to unpack my relationship to my art community. These sites for collaboration, support structures, and experimentation. The work was really about negotiating these boundaries within relationships and the misunderstandings that happen between people through gestures of sincerity. So a lot of the work in this exhibition were propped up by one another. They were tethered to each other. They were holding each other up. And I really wanted to have this kind of implied dependency or interdependency of the objects in the sculpture. The works are fueled by images of an archive past collaborations, and the motivation to enact this gesture was to turn a critical lens to explore what we hope to gain through connecting with others and how can we effectively connect to others without dissolving ourselves. At the time, community and collaboration had become these really hot words, and I was suspicious of how others defined them. So Wilhelm Flusser is a philosopher who's known for his explorations on communication and artistic production, and he writes about this idea of gestures of loving. And so he states in his text that the gesture of loving is this complicated gesture because it's always misread when it's enacted. So if it's described verbally, then it sounds magical, and if it's enacted physically, then it becomes sexual or it becomes this kind of pressure. So in the gesture of loving, there are these complications, these misinterpretations, perhaps forms of censorship in the intent to do no harm. And my interest in the series was in the practice of or slowing down of these complications in order to work on the most small and most intricate departures from an intimate relationship. So how this manifested is that I restaged these past collaborations, already altered through my own aesthetics and memory of them. I created this faux gallery space that looked kind of like the space that the work was going to be exhibited in. I asked my previous collaborators to reperform my loose script of these collaborations in this gallery. And for the most part, all the actions were scripted, but in the end, I let them kind of have the free reins of it, and it evolved. If I really think back to it, the work was really about creating a scenario to reassemble the members of the group, to remember together these past sentiments, and to create different translations of this experience from all of our different viewpoints. So here's another video. So all of the footage from the performance were turned into 2-minute video loops, and they were also color shifted. These videos were all around the gallery space, and I really thought about the videos in relationship to the sculpture, like what do they do? And for me, these two-dimensional works were creating a tempo or a narrative for the viewers to kind of follow through the exhibition and how they navigated and explored the sculptures. And in the end of the video, there's this pause, because it's such a chaotic video, I wanted to have like a moment where they saw the thought of the video in relationship to the gallery, maybe thinking about that these actions were carried over or happened in the gallery. So it was part of 9 videos that were projected in the space, and they all had this kind of applied tension. So they shifted in scale, and they created this like rhythm to the exhibition. The forms from the sculpture are directly lifted and inspired by the forms in the rescripted performance. So the big sculpture of this orange guy on the orange O is lifted from this small like O that was hanging on off this like sawhorse. And then this kind of bluish hammer on the right is lifted from a drawing translation of a hammer on the wall. So the forms are kind of they're informed by the collaborative performance. So the series really examined these misunderstandings, these micro disconnections, and the residual impressions that are left over by intimate relationships, reflecting on their impact on individuals and community structures. So I was really trying to reconfigure a physical and emotional space through these gestures of sincerity and material tension, while reimagining past collaborations with artists and friends through these kind of fictionalized retellings. So for me, these mediations articulated a longing for connection and a space for belonging. Okay, so I'm going to try to zoom through this one. The sculptures are made out of this 5-part material, but it's essentially it's a polymer gypsum. So what that is a plaster 5-part mix. So instead of water that you would normally put with plaster, it's a glue. And then it has like some dry resin and ammonia chloride. But they're like super durable. Great question. I always forget to talk about that. Okay, so this is an exhibition I had 2 years ago in Los Angeles. And it's called Smoking in the Garden. It's a series I started in 2019, and the aim of the series was to make my relationship with my mother closer. Not that our relationship was bad or anything, but familial relationships can be complicated. So these are the first sculptures. It's still made out of that same material. That's a polymer gypsum. I was working with a family oral folklore that was about our ancestors in the Philippines forest. So the narrative became this vehicle for processing trauma within multiple levels, our mother-daughter relationship, her relationship with her family, and also the history of the Philippines. For me, these forms, I was really thinking about plants performing these extended dance gestures, almost like a plie from ballet. And the thorns had been this form I'd been using for its ability to protect and at the same time harm itself. I was also carving drawings inspired from the oral tale to mark the sculpture like a tattoo, and at the same time a sort of scar that held a history on the surface of the skin. This work is a kind of evolution of the previous sculpture. It was one of the 3 sculptures in that exhibition, and it's 16 feet long. And it was entitled Remedies. And it was made with medical casting tape, epoxy resin, epoxy clay, and embedded peacock feathers and some like casts. So I was really thinking a lot about inherited remedies to treat pain. So the pinkish parts of the sculpture being this history of wounds bandaged by the medical casting tape. It also had hands that were chained together as this kind of protective amulet. I was also thinking a lot about the surface of the leaves as like shapes of eyes. That could act as a lens to cast a filtered viewpoint of the world. And I was also really interested in how when you first approach the sculpture from the gallery, you see it at this condensed viewpoint. And as you walk around it, it expands. So thinking about the relationship, how relationships move back and forth from one another, and then how the viewer can have that similar moving back and forth from the sculpture. So the title of the series is inspired by my mother's maiden name and my inherited middle name, which is Fumar. A name translated from Spanish to English is to smoke. So my mother's tale seemed to mimic this amorphous quality of smoke, shifting and changing shape and aiming to purify the trauma. Depending on how the story was told, if it acted more like a trigger, her childhood story would turn into a darker kind of thing. And these metaphor of smoke would then, rather than purify, it would be more like a disease, catalyzing the narrative into a trauma loop. The works in the series ended up being more of a result of my contemplation on the narrative surrounding our history and my relationship with my mother. As you may have already known, I love having 2D works with my sculptures. So the drawings kind of were an anchor to the series in the same way the videos and the other works were. So I call these drawings because I'm literally using oil pastel to make these drawings, and I'm carving on the surface, and it's a mark made rather than paint. And so these drawings, they served as a means to conjure this complicated power carried through our ancestors. I thought of it as a power that could restrict, but also at the same time heal. The abstract nature of the imagery was to give this aura or a visual form to the characters within that narrative. When dealing with very personal subject matter, especially that is outside of my own, I think it's important to keep those stories private. And often when I'm making a series, I think of 3 levels of audience. So the most immediate level is this personal level where oral stories are communicated and recorded through objects. Any materials that are too revealing are kept private. The second level is this exchange between a community, and this might be an identity or a specific group of people. And then the third level is generally those who might relate to the larger topic of the relationship dynamics. So for this specific series, it's thinking about the relationship between mothers and daughters and also immigrant families. Here's another work, Circling You Like the Ocean. So the title of this work is that, and it's meant to be a merge of a mask, a family tree, and at the same time, 2 figures locking in an embrace. It's made with that same material that's like the polymer gypsum, but it also has fiberglass, acrylic paint, and epoxy resin. So in this sculpture, there are ceramic pieces that are crafted by my mother, and there are objects that she made as she was telling me the story. So I kind of view them as this type of physical record that kind of absorbed her oral tale. And they were interspersed in the sculpture and also in the floor. I kind of thought of them as these rune stones or seeds that conjure a new growth or future. Okay, I think, so this is the last type of works that were in the show, and they're wall pieces, which are a merge between a sculpture and a drawing. And these were called Ancestors, which is a play on words. I wanted to create a connector piece for the works in the exhibition. The resin pieces have peacock feathers, necklace, chains, ceramics, and stickers embedded into the resin, and it's colored with oil pastel and acrylic paint. They're a material vocabulary that I'm building from currently, and they serve as this new type of fossil in my work that encases and freezes history. So this is like the newest work I've been working on right now. So many of the forms of my work emerge from deep engagements with fragmented and complex narratives. So whether it's shaped through memory loss, migration, or longing, my research views storytelling as this spatial and material metaphor for resilience and transformation. And through this lens, my work invites new perspectives on how histories are embodied and shared within communities, contributing to the evolving negotiation of identity in America. Okay, so I was like the fastest artist talk I've ever done. So now that you know a bit about my interest in my own research and practice as an artist, I'll show you now how that informs the way I think about how I teach. So in UCSB, there are 2 ways to major in art. One is through the College of Letters and Sciences. And so this is on their website, but I'll just read through it. So The College of Letters and Sciences, which offers a structured program that guides students through beginning courses to advance. We offer a highly flexible, rigorous, and opportunity-filled program that includes our selective honors program, which is 1 year commitment. So it's a seminar, you get a studio space, and you have a final exhibition. That's a group exhibition. The majority of art classes in UCSB take place in the Department of Art and include a range of materials, and the genesis of the curricula derives from the idea that thinking and making are intertwined. So the classes here, what you're kind of going to expect in LNS is that you're getting kind of the hands-on skills. We're teaching you the basics and going through kind of the conceptual foundation of the program. So the classes I teach is spatial studies, sculpture, art, 7C. There's a foundation series called the C series, 7 series. And essentially it goes over, it teaches art history through the lens of the practitioner. So what that means is rather than an art historian talking about the essential like historic moments through that practice. So for me, sculpture, it's utilizing a sculptor who's a practicing artist talking about the important things about sculpture. So that's the kind of like little bit of a difference. This class goes through the basics. So this is where you'll learn how to work with wood, how to work with plaster, and how to work with metal. So for art majors, this is a required course. And so these are kind of student work, so you get an idea. As you advance to the next level of sculpture, which is beginning sculpture, you build on that 7C, that proto foundational class, where you work with power tools in the wood shop, and then you learn how to weld in the metal shop. So in the courses I teach, I usually lead it in themes. And they're usually centered on the topic of interest that I'm interested in. So this is called Magic Hour. So where I ask students to think about magic as this invisible force that directs how bodies move and navigate the world. So through this, students are asked to critically examine the historical relationship between the sculpted body and also the vulnerable body. So you're exploring this kind of transformative potential of art to reinterpret personal histories while fusing them into healing expressions that resonate with the urgent concerns of our present day conditions. So you can see how that's like very directly related to my research, but I have these prompts. So this is part of one of it's called Magic Shoes. So the students are asked to develop these shoes that give them some sort of empowerment, or they're kind of extending that gesture. And then they walk through and they have to either crush or stomp. But there's like all of these assignments that are geared towards thinking about magic in that way. Ooh. Okay. That's too loud, so we're not going to play those videos. Okay. So the other way to major in art is through the College of Creative Studies, which you have to apply with a portfolio for. So I'm just going to read this. So the College of Creative Studies art program is designed for students who are prepared to work independently as artists from the start. CCS art students are admitted by portfolio review through the supplemental CCS application, attend smaller classes, work closely with faculty advisors, go through a rigorous mid-residency review process, and stage a senior exhibition. So most students have studio space by their sophomore year, and the emphasis includes spatial arts, sculpture, painting, and book arts. So the difference between that is that you have a studio immediately, basically in your sophomore year. We have a smaller teaching like a faculty to student ratio. And essentially, you go through a lot of different processes. And the idea is that you are going to become, a practitioner in arts. So you have a first year review, and then you have a mid-residency review, which is kind of like going over what you've done over the half-time during the program. And then you work towards a senior exhibition. So it's your solo exhibition in your senior year. And we walk you through that whole process. But the idea is that you're making art most of the time. And it's kind of self-driven, but you have these advisors that are your point persons to ask questions with. So there's a closer relationship to the faculty and the students in this program. So the classes that are taught in CCS, are essentially honors classes. So if you're in another department like LNS and you want to take a CCS course, that course is already in honors. So the classes are different. So our expectation in CCS is that you do take those preliminary classes in LNS where you learn the basics. And when you take a class in CCS, there are more advanced themes and research to discuss. So in a CCS course that I teach in fall and winter is called The Fictive Body within sculpture, and it investigates these narrative historical origins and how it's evolved in contemporary context. So students, they utilize fiction and personal mythologies to experiment with the potential of sculpture as an archival medium. So essentially the students were like doing readings, we're having a lot of discussions, we're having artists come speak about their insights. And then we also build for a final group exhibition. So there's an exhibition component that they're working with. And then I'm just going to go over this last class and then I'll open for questions. So the other class I teach is rendering the archive. So again, my practice is so heavily inspires the course material. So as someone who works collaboratively across many mediums of art making, so painting, video, sculpture, drawing, I love to incorporate experimental and multidisciplinary methods to teaching art. So this is an experimental course that explores contemporary art making methods to translate affect, embodiment, and memory into compelling narratives. So students collaborate to design and execute these elaborate events, integrating elements of lighting, performance, installation, and mixed media. So these events are then recorded and documented, and they serve as primary source material or research for creating a personal series of two-dimensional works. So it's 10-week quarter. So weeks 5 to 10, you are tasked with making a series. So it could be either painting or drawing or a combination of the two. So that's kind of how I lead my courses. So I see there's already one question there. I'm gonna go to the next slide for just questions. Okay, so the question is, how is the major evolving with respect to teaching with the advancement in AI, Gen AI? Is there or will there be courses on this topic? I think I wouldn't say, so I'm in spatial studies and sculpture, so I don't think they necessarily touch within that medium because we're dealing with physical objects. I would imagine that as it gets more prolific, that might be something that is talked about more in video or digital works, but that isn't something that is quite in the art department currently. That's maybe, I have seen those in different areas and in different departments. And so one of the pros of a UC is that you can take classes outside of your department, right? So you don't, if you're interested in Gen AI or AI, there are courses in that are outside of our major. Okay, hopefully that answered that. Okay, so what is your approach to art criticism and feedback in the classroom? What are the opportunities for students to show and exhibit their work? So art criticism, so all of the classes, all of the art classes have a critique component to it. So every time you have a project due, chances are, at least in all of my classes, there is a critique. And for me, in my classes, I do community commitments first to kind of create a baseline. And then we go into the critique, which can last. So there's courses that have critiques, like maybe you'll have a critique In LNS, because there's so much more students, you might have a critique for 8 minutes for your project. And then the other spectrum of that could be you might have a critique in CCS for 50 minutes or an hour. So there's a very vast difference. Okay, and then to show and exhibit their work. So there's a Glassbox art gallery, and that is, you apply for it. So that's always an opportunity every quarter. So it's week by week. What else? There is an atrium open house in the sculptures. So for sculptors or any classes that you take, we usually have an open house 2 out of the 3 quarters, and that's a chance to exhibit your work. What else? Any exhibitions in CCS, there are course exhibitions, like you saw the fictive body that I taught, that always ends in an exhibition. And then for CCS, you have a senior thesis exhibition. So that's you making a solo exhibition of your work. Okay. And then the next one is, if you have no skill in art, can you still get into the art department? You definitely can. So if you have LNS is a perfect program for that because you're building your skills. CCS is a little different because the expectation is that you're coming in already as an artist, but LNS, you can pick up those skills and become an artist. Any more questions? I'm a perfect resource, so if you have any questions, because I know it can be very confusing.
For our guests, if any of you are considering and applying to our College of Creative Studies art major, this is a great opportunity to ask Professor Garcia regarding the portfolio requirement as well as the letter of intent and many things of that sort, if any of you are interested. Well, if there are no more questions, then we can conclude today's lecture. Thank you so much, Professor Kim Garcia, for joining us today and giving us more insight on the 2 different ways of majoring in art at UC Santa Barbara. To our guests and attendees, thank you so much for attending today's lecture. As a reminder, these and all of our virtual faculty lecture series will be available on our YouTube, UCSB for me. We still have 3 lectures coming up. So if you'd like to register, you can view that on the screen, or you can visit that link provided on the screen. I'll send it in the chat. But again, thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. And we'll see you hopefully next week for a chemical engineering lecture.